All right, I'm joined by my colleague Alex here to unpack truly one of the weirdest stories we've had fall in our laps in quite a while. This is the lawsuit between Strava and Garmin. So Strava is suing Garmin over two specific features, one being heat maps and the other being segments. So let's unpack all of this, and then I think we can talk about why this lawsuit is so crazy and perhaps hypothesize as to why Strava is doing this and why now. Okay, so first things first, did you know that Garmin had segments?
Yes, I did.
You did? Okay, did. You're the one.
I'm the one. I'm part of the problem, Michael.
Yeah, okay.
I was one of the rare people because I am now 30 years old and got into this more than 10 years ago. I had a Garmin before I had Strava, and I would say that today I'm among the minority because usually you get Strava before getting the Garmin, if you get a Garmin at all.
Yes. And so I wanted to pick your brain about this because obviously you're a heavy Strava user. You're a longtime Strava user. I've had a Strava account as well since I think the very beginning. Strava started in like 2009. But I'm a tinfoil hat guy. I'm a privacy hawk. So I've been, I don't think I follow anybody on Strava. I use it for very personal reasons. It's a log basically.
Yeah. I still don't know Michael's Strava identity.
That's right.
Just for the record.
Secret Strava account. But so let's go through this a little bit here. First of all, the TikTok, the journalistic term, not the social media app. Let's walk through, let's go down, go through the history here a little bit. So there's a bit of context. And we should first and foremost, right off the top, give a hat tip to DC Rainmaker, who does an incredible amount of work digging into this kind of stuff and is a device nerd, a product reviewer, great YouTube channel. And he had a pretty wonderful video unpacking all this. Highly recommend that you watch that as well. We're going to talk about it specifically from a running context here as a running YouTube channel. So December 2014, Strava files its heat map patent application. So basically, heat map for the uninitiated, it is taking user data. So if you've got a platform like Strava and you're getting hundreds of thousands or millions of people's of user data as to like where they run on a regular basis, they will take all that data and they will use a map and superimpose every single runner's run over top of a certain area. Et voila, you get a heat map. If you look at a city like New York, you can see lots of people running circles around various parts of Central Park. Super useful feature if you're traveling, right? Or if you're new to running.
I did this yesterday, by the way. I was in Brooklyn and did not know where the heck to run. So I looked at the heat map and there was a nice 11K heat map loop that I followed and did. So yes, extremely useful.
The weird thing about all of this is, okay, so Strava applies for the patent the end of December 2014. They get the patent granted in 2016 from the U.S. Patent Office, which is one thing. And it should be noted that while patents can be granted, they can also be challenged pretty easily as well. It's kind of crazy that Strava got a patent for this because the whole concept of the heat map is not, I don't think, a novel concept, even from way back in, over a decade ago. I think the concept of the heat map has been around forever. It's sort of a weird thing for them to get a patent for in the first place.
Yeah. From what I understand, Garmin itself rolled out their own version of heat maps a year beforehand in 2013, and many third-party sites were using heat map related things. Even the New York Times had a type of heat map that you could follow to see. It was especially
for cycling
data back in the day. But yeah, that existed.
It was a novel feature when we were starting to collect and harvest huge amounts of data, right at the advent of social media, right? Is this idea that you can take all that and you can create this visual effect. So not by any means a Strava invention, but I guess not even applying it specifically for running or cycling, because as you said, Garmin a year before started doing this because obviously they had their watches and their bike computers and they're like, hey, it's pretty easy to use a GPS map and layer that data over top of each other. And red means there's a lot of runners running around this park, and so keep that in mind for later. Garmin had
one quick thing to add
yeah.
too. Strava, I think one of its unique features around its own heat maps, and maybe one part of what motivated the patent, is that they had an individual heat map feature. You could eventually look at like which roads you did the most. So I guess for your own personal data, that might be useful.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so Strava gets its patent. We should also keep in mind that there were like you said, there were like dozens of other platforms that were exploiting the heat map concept, either for the individual or for a collective group in a specific location. Next thing that is in this lawsuit, segments. This makes a little bit more sense, at least superficially, when you think of it, because you think about like I say running and I say segment, it's immediately you go Strava segment, right? I have to admit, I've used Garmin's for years. I've tested, every Garmin watch pretty much that's ever existed in the last 15 years, for running at least. And I didn't realize that it makes sense. Okay. Yeah. Garmin Connect, probably there's a feature for segments, but I didn't realize it. And I don't think anybody uses it.
I used it for a year. Before getting Strava, there was a lack of network effect, I guess. As soon as I got on Strava, I could compare my segments, my speed to everybody else. And then I quickly forgot about the Garmin segments.
So segments are as old as Strava itself. Like shortly after Strava rolled out as a public platform, in 2009, Strava announced the segment feature. Obviously, part of the bread and butter of what Strava does, and it's part of Strava's identity. And then they file for their patent. Really weird. Like 2 years later, at the end of March in 2011, they file for a patent for segments. And then in June 2014, so a few years after that, Garmin announces a feature in Garmin Connect called Garmin Segments, which was in cycling first, and then eventually it trickled down to running as well. I don't think it's a super successful feature. It's existed for more than 10 years, and I would imagine very few people that are watching or listening to this have any idea that feature was available in their Garmin. It's probably not something they exploit in their Garmin. And from the sounds of it, it doesn't sound like a feature that Garmin has really drilled down on or improved or marketed in any way. It's almost kind of like a dead or dormant feature. Interestingly enough, in the timeline of all this, in 2015, Garmin and Strava, two companies that have a very symbiotic relationship, which we'll get into in a bit here when we start asking, like, why are they doing this? Garmin, Strava, they actually come together, and companies do this quite often. They come together and they have what's called a master cooperation agreement, where basically they make sure that they're working in tandem to a degree, and they kind of lay out the groundwork for like, this is how we're going to work together so that, rising tides raise all boats, or whatever the saying is, right? So they come together with this MCA, and they agree to develop things like segments together, with basically the Strava segment being the dominant feature, and Garmin being the sort of the means to get it from your wrist and from you actually doing the segment onto the platform that you care about, which is Strava.
Mm-hmm.
And then we fast forward to last year. And it's important to note that last year, Strava altered its agreement with third-party apps, its API.
They got greedy.
And they changed the API user agreement with third-party apps, which we wrote about last year. We talked about it I think we talked about it in a podcast last year. Basically broke a bunch of apps. And when you dug down to what was going on there, at its core, basically Strava is like, we don't want you using this data in certain ways, specifically when it came to using that data for AI training.
Mm-hmm. And it was, you could read between the lines kind of quickly to see what they were trying to do. So if you look at it through an example of an app that I used, Final Surge, which is how you communicate with your coach, Strava didn't want to allow the sharing of your own data to other people. Essentially, I kind of read it as like forming that relationship with a coach on another app, because it seemed like they were trying to develop their own type of coaching platform first with their like crappy little Strava AI, which still is crappy. And then with the acquisition of, or the merger with Runna, which started to make Strava seem like much more of a complete threat and becoming the like one and done running app.
Yeah. All encompassing, all powerful, all knowing. And this actually opens up an interesting debate about, who owns your data. Strava is arguing effectively they own the data. Garmin is pushing back and saying, whoa, ho, ho, that's not cool. Where does the data come from? The entry point for the data is on your wrist from a Garmin device predominantly. And then little smaller third-party apps like Final Surge, a coaching app, they're like, hey, we just built this whole thing with this idea that this ecosystem existed, and now you're crushing this ecosystem and pulling the rug out from under our feet. So there's this kind of push-pull and tension that's going on in the industry, and Strava has decided to become very aggressive here. And so they have sued Garmin now, and listen to this. This is nuts. In the filing, it says, Strava says in their filing, their lawyers write, monetary relief alone is inadequate, and that they are seeking a permanent injunction prohibiting Garmin from making, using, offering to sell, selling, or importing the accused implements. So basically what they're saying is, we're suing to block Garmin from permanently from selling their running watches and their bike computers as well.
Mm-hmm. Which is crazy in its own
sense. Get out of the business. Get out of the business is basically kind of what they're threatening right now. Which is nuts.
Which is nuts. And also is not good news for Garmin lovers if eventually this goes through, which, I mean, listen, I'm not a lawyer, but I can't see this happening. It's not good for people who want Garmin watches and devices in the future. But also, I started wondering what happens to people who have Garmins right now? Because what happens if this relationship sours? Would you like your Garmin as much if you can't post on Strava? A lot of people have Strava and a lot of people care now. Now, another part of this document, or I guess this is not a document. This is, again, DC Rainmaker's communication with Strava. Okay, so a second shout out to him, because I think he asked a similar question. It was like, well, what happens to the current consumers? And Strava hit him with a type of answer saying, we're going to make sure that current consumers are not affected. This is just between the businesses. But I mean, if Garmin and Strava aren't compatible, I can already see a few things that would make a Garmin product a lot less appealing.
Yeah, to me, this seems like this is a symbiotic relationship. This is, before we hit record on this, we were trying to flesh out an example. My first thought was, in the running context, it would be kind of like the World Marathon Majors, like the Abbott World Marathon Majors as its own company, going to war with the World Marathon Major events, like going to war with London, New York, Boston. It's like they benefit from each other so completely that one without the other is deeply weakened. And this is an even more extreme version of this. I was thinking, there's animals in nature that have a deeply bound symbiotic relationship where it's I was thinking about those little birds that hang out on the face of a hippo or a crocodile and eat mites off around their eyes. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's one needs the other, right? Yeah. They will both die if they don't coexist, right? I don't know which one the bird is and which one the hippo is in this context between Strava and Garmin, but that's the comp I was thinking of. Is what is Strava doing here? If they actually kind of continue to be aggressive with this and try to block Garmin from having a symbiotic relationship with their platform, they are deeply hamstringing themselves. They're shooting themselves in the foot here. So this leads me to think like this can't be an honest and serious attack that they actually want to go through with. They're trying to achieve something else. So my question for you, Alex, is like, what's really going on here?
I know. Yeah, it's like the why now. That's what stuck out to me. Why now? Because both points that we mentioned here, the heat maps and the segments, the issues in question happened a decade ago. So what's going on right now? And I don't know. It's almost as if, I don't know, is there a bit of hubris on Strava's side where they think that they can win this lawsuit and not only hamstring Garmin, but make a lot of money doing so, and so that they can keep going on their acquisition spree? I have no idea. It doesn't sound like a good idea, at least from an outsider's perspective, given that Garmin has a very good track record when it comes to their own lawsuits. I mean, they're a huge company. They're about 10 times the size of Strava. Strava's a $2 billion company, and Garmin is worth, actually more than that, Garmin's worth almost $50 billion.
Yeah.
And so you're tackling a behemoth here.
I've always kind of joked that the Garmin is only into running watches and cycling computers because like some engineer that works on their much larger marine or military contracts at Garmin is like a runner or a cyclist and was like, hey, this is cool. We could use the technology we use on like Navy frigates and we have for US defense contracts. We could port that over and make a cool running watch. It's really accurate, like, and it's this like plaything in the corner. But you don't want to poke the bear here, and Garmin is the bear in this situation. Unless, I guess, like, yes, okay, so Strava there's lots of rumors that they're contemplating an IPO. So they're contemplating going public. This is a weird way, again, to refer to DC Rainmaker. He suggested that perhaps this is a publicity stunt. And I agree with him when he says that, like, this is a weird publicity stunt. This is a bad idea for a publicity stunt as far as I'm concerned, because it just kind of looks like you're kind of like, you're just causing trouble for very little reason. I guess maybe if there's some sort of settlement here. The other question one could have is like, Strava would know this, but like, what's the percentage of devices? What's the trend here? How many Garmin devices are on their platform versus how many Apple devices are on their platform? Apple's made huge headway in the last few years. We know because we've discussed this in the past, talking about the Apple Watch as a running watch. It has not been the best, most smoothest relationship between the Strava app and the Apple Watch in the past. There's been some hiccups. That's apparently getting ironed out, which leads me to believe that there's like maybe a little bit of better communication and better cooperation there. Love to know what the number is in terms of like how many Apple Watches are feeding into Strava every single day versus how many Garmin's. Is there a drift that's happening, or is it like, but even then, still, it's got to be a huge number of Garmin's. It just seems crazy to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't try to continue your analogy about the hippos and the birds without going to the High Park Zoo here, but basically, it's not only Apple Watches that are taking some of the or that are occupying more of Strava as opposed to Garmin. There's Sunto, there's Coros, there's Polar. The world of GPS wearables is far removed from the days of Garmin dominance. And here's another thing is I wonder if Strava is seeing that and they think that they can survive quite well without Garmin. Why would they want to cut Garmin out? That part, I still don't know.
I mean, final thing to note here is that Garmin did change its API agreement with third-party apps earlier this year. And perhaps that ruffled the feathers of Strava here, because this is all, at the end of the day, what this all is. This is all a battle for our data. That's what this is. For ownership and control of our running and cycling and whatever else. Every moment we live and breathe, if we're wearing these wearables that are tracking our movements and our heart rate and our sleep, as well as our exercise. So that data is extremely valuable, particularly to a company like Strava and also to a company like Garmin as well. So I think this is a little bit of a tit for tat and a little bit of a push-pull scenario between these two companies. I don't wonder if this gets resolved, quietly over the course of the next several months, and they go back to being happily ever after again and symbiotic. We shall see. All right, Mr. Sear. Hopefully your Strava account. Well, your Strava account won't be rocked because you are on the app. You are using the Apple device to feed Strava. But hopefully, if you are watching this and you've got a Garmin, hopefully nothing changes for you at least in the short term. You're on Strava as well. All right, thanks, Alex.
All right. Till next time.